back to coverage of Grand Prix Memphis. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe. I'm in the booth with Reed Duke, and it is time for round 15 action. This, of course, is our last round of Swiss play. This is the round that's going to determine who makes it into the top 8 and who doesn't. And right now we've got John Rolfe versus Andrew Tenjum. And that's going to be your decider here for one of the slots in the top 8. Is it going to be mono red in the hands of John Rolfe, or is it going to be Andrew Tenjum playing Grixis Energy? What's your take on the matchup, Reed?
It's a fine question, Marshall. These are both players we've watched at earlier points in the day. John Rolfe, we've sort of been singing his praises as a mono red player. He had a Pro Tour top 8 just a few months ago with, essentially this same deck. However, if you watched last round, Andrew Tenjum just came off a win against one of the best players in the room, also playing mono red in Matt Severa. So he certainly knows this matchup and has proven to us that he can win. Based on what I'm looking at on the board, I would rather be in John Rolfe's seat. He's got a great start here with 2 Bomat Couriers on the play.
Oh, you're not kidding. And look, there's more. An Earthshaker Kenra, and so far nothing from Tenjum. He's going to have to cast a spell this turn. So triggers on the stack. And he's got an Abrade to take out the original Bomat Courier.
All right, so Abrade just about the best Tenjum can ask for as a turn 2 play. The problem is when mono red has such a great start on the play, answering their creatures at a 1-for-1 rate after the fact just leaves you, sort of hemorrhaging life total, as a lot of these creatures have haste and they're cheaper. They cost less mana to cast and attack than you're spending to answer them.
That's right. Even a relatively cheap card like Abrade still falls behind when it's taking out a Bomat Courier. They already got to attack a couple of times. This is its third attack.
So the card that Andrew Tenjum really needed there, a dynamic that we've watched in Standard for nearly a year now, is Whirler Virtuoso. That's one of the best ways to stabilize against these great draws from mono red. Tenjum didn't have it in this particular case, and the game's going to be a lot more challenging because of that.
Again, even if he has 1-for-1 removal here, which it looks like he's got a second copy of Abrade at the ready, he's targeting the Bomat Couriers, and you mentioned his life total is going to be the one to take a hit here. And that is the case, as the Earthshaker Kenra has been ignored thus far. And wow, what a follow-up here for John Rolfe. Rekindling Phoenix, one of the new stars in Standard. This card's extremely difficult to deal with, but Andrew Tenjum has the answer.
Wow, so just excellent starts from both players. John Rolfe with a creature every turn, all 4 of his first land drops, and Andrew Tenjum with a removal spell every turn. Tap land on turn 1, as is usually the case with this 3-color mid-range deck, then removal. So doing a nice job keeping pace, and we've still got a game on our hands on turn 5 here.
Andrew at 14 life, so a reasonable life total. And John, though, this could be a super scary turn for Andrew Tenjum, right? I mean, we could see Chandra's or another Phoenix or
yeah, and a card I think that John Rolfe has in hand is Hazoret the Fervent, but if there's no 5th land drop to pair with it, that means he can't get his hand size low enough to be able to attack with haste. Might still be an acceptable play, though, as if Andrew Tenjum doesn't have a follow-up Vraska's Contempt, Hazoret should be able to take over the game in the long run.
Right. Of course, this is an opportunity for John to play around any type of counter magic and just resolve a Hazoret, but it's a pretty lackluster turn as far as damage goes. He'd only get to attack for 2 in that scenario. So I think he's going to go for an on-crop Crasher and attack for 5 instead, drop you down to 9.
You got to wonder if there's something to learn from John Rolfe's body language there, sort of cutting his mana. He tapped 3 lands, then tapped a 4th, then untapped them all, and tapped 3 again. So, potentially deciding between 2 options there.
I think from Andrew's perspective, there is something to learn, but it's no good news.
Right.
If he was deciding between this or any 4-drop that he plays, you're like, oh, great. Because he's going to play it next turn, probably. You got to deal with all of it. All right, Tenjum says land go. Perhaps another Vraska's Contempt in John Rolfe's future.
Yep, and you saw him main phase the Vraska's Contempt on Rekindling Phoenix, but potentially this time passing with open mana, anticipating an even bigger threat like that Hazoret.
But look at this. John Rolfe continues to play around cards like that by casting another Earthshaker Kenra. And in fact, there is a Vraska's Contempt, but Andrew is basically priced into killing something here. And that means that if John does have a card like Hazoret, he's much more likely to get to actually untap with it or attack with it and have it survive, because that's already 2 copies of Vraska's Contempt in the graveyard. Now, the card I'm thinking about here, if I'm in John Rolfe's seat, well, I don't have to think about it anymore, would be Torrential Gearhulk. But here's Whirler Virtuoso for Tenjum. A little late to the party, but looks pretty good here, actually.
Yeah, that's going to be a good way to combat. Wow.
Double trouble.
Yeah, so up to 7 energy. That means 2 Thopter tokens at the ready. This is a pretty decent way to combat Hazoret, short of actually, exiling her with Vraska's Contempt. You need a steady stream of disposable bodies to chump block the god, because you really can't. I mean, of course, Andrew can't take a hit at 5 life, but even if he had a few more points of life to work with, you do not want to be taking away your life total at chunks of 5 against mono red.
Yeah, Andrew still faces a lot of pressure with Hazoret, because while he can keep her at bay for a few turns, at only 5 life, John can simply start throwing cards.
So you saw
face.
Andrew just take the die on 3 off of his energy counter to represent making a Thopter and blocking. They sort of shortcutted that.
Right. Oh, and there it is. Vraska's Contempt number 3 for Andrew Tenjum. This draw has really cooperated with him, even with the slow start. A braid, triple Vraska's Contempt. That's the kind of thing he wants to see to go along with his 2 Whirler Virtuosos. But the hits do not stop for John Rolfe. He's got another big threat with another Rekindling Phoenix. This is a real slugfest, Reed. They're just going toe-to-toe here. Oh, Scarab God now. Now, are there any creatures around? I suppose there's a few Bomat Couriers somewhere, right?
Yeah, John Rolfe is not a very coverage-friendly player to have down there, as he keeps a lot of his stuff off the screen. But we remember 2 Abrades did take care of 2 Bomat Couriers earlier in the game.
And, everything else got exiled.
I think John just goes ahead and puts his cards back in the deck box when they get killed, throws them in his backpack.
John's now in the tank.
So let's talk a little bit about these players, Marshall. John Rolfe, ton of success this year. One of the top-ranked players on the Player of the Year leaderboard. So he is looking for a Grand Prix top 8 here to continue his march towards Platinum, potentially making the World Championships. Andrew Tenjum, a player who's been around a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Solid success on the Star City Games Open Series circuit, but he's trying for his first Grand Prix top 8, which I'm sure would mean a lot to him. Speaking from experience, when you've been playing a long time, the first time you break through is really exciting.
Less exciting here is a Bomat Courier from John Rolfe. But he does have Scavenger Grounds and the mana to activate it. So if Andrew wants to try to use the Scarab God, John can interact, right?
It's
the
Grasping Dunes.
I just noticed that too, Reed. My apologies.
Yeah, it's a shame to have the wrong value land at the wrong time.
I think I was being too hopeful on John Rolfe's behalf. Oh, and look at this from Andrew Tenjum. Since that is not a Scavenger Grounds, this is going to work out very poorly for John. His Rekindling Phoenix is going to go to the yard. He's going to get the Elemental token. But before any of the nonsense can happen, Andrew says, I'll take that, thank you very much, and uses the Scarab God to get back the Rekindling Phoenix. There's the Elemental. What a beating. Great way to spend 6 mana there from Tenjum.
Yeah, we saw that play pattern draw a concession from Brad Nelson in a Scarab God matchup earlier when it was one of our players who we expect in the top 8. Matthew Kling used that trick, 6 mana. I'll kill one of your creatures in my own upkeep, rebuy it with the Scarab God.
Get that scry and all that stuff too. Now that Elemental token is going to die anyway, right? the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this creature and return target card named Rekindling Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. If there's no Rekindling Phoenix, does it still get sacked?
It does not. That ability can't go on the stack if there's no Rekindling Phoenix in the graveyard.
So John Rolfe has a fine little chump block here if you'd like to do it. That is not much of a consolation after that turn, though, is it?
No. Andrew Tendrum at 7 life, but a nice suite of blockers there, including the Flying Blocker and Rekindling Phoenix, so it's going to be tough for Rolfe to force through these last few points of damage.
This draw from Andrew Tendrum has been lovely.
Yeah, I mean, short of the Whirler Virtuoso showing up a tiny bit late to the party, he effectively played the best card he could have played on every single turn.
Mm-hmm. Is John actually considering going for the super block, all 3 creatures?
So 2 possibilities jump to mind here. Either John can try to kill the Scarab God in combat and somehow win a long game. That seems exceedingly unlikely. But I like this play instead of letting the Kenra go to the graveyard. He can then unearth it, make one of Tendrum's creatures unable to block, and see what happens.
So he's going to pay the Eternalized cost there, thanks to that mountain that he drew off the top of the library. What's going on here? It looks like a judge is coming in to ask a question. Zombie Phoenix.
Yep.
I wonder if they're asking if this dies, what happens? Like, does he get the token, or, I mean, does it say you?
It's a fine question.
I wonder if that, I don't even know if that's what they're
Phoenix
asking.
dies, create a 0/1 red elemental token creature. So, yes, that is a token copy of Rekindling Phoenix. And even though tokens don't actually wind up in the graveyard, they do count as dying if they if they take lethal damage. So I believe Andrew Tendrum would get a 0/1 elemental token if the Phoenix dies due to combat damage.
Every little bit counts.
Naturally, there's no Phoenix to return from the graveyard, but
Right.
it would be a 0/1 blocker, which is irrelevant in a close game like this. Okay, John Rolfe is not doing a great job displaying the board here, as he kind of put the token on top of the Kenra.
Yeah, I don't know why he did that. That thing should just be gone. We have a token to represent the card. It's just less clear. In fact, it almost looks like there's 2 creatures attacking here.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I wish we would. Maybe we can have him just take out that original Kenra, just for any confusion's sake.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, and there's the elemental. So now somehow both players have elementals with no Rekindling Phoenixes in their graveyards.
Okay, so that's a 4/4 haste creature. We get a triggered ability from the Scarab God, and pretty soon we're going to see that moment where the Scarab God turns the tables against mono red, starts attacking with all these hasted 4/4 threats.
Even getting back these relatively unimpressive cards like Bomat Courier, it's still just enough raw power.
Yeah, and now John Rolfe just left with no offense. Andrew Tendrum at a relatively comfortable 7 life. I don't see how the mono red player claws back into this one.
Man, Andrew Tendrum just lining up those answers beautifully for the threats on the other side of the table.
See what John Rolfe can come up with on his probably last draw step of the game. If he had a Hazaret, the Grasping Dunes could take care of the Elemental token. He could attack for 6, but 6 is not good enough when he's facing a lethal attack on the Crackback.
John's just going over his options, but it feels like he's out of them. we'll let him think this through. I have one thing for a little bit later, Reed, and I want to remind the viewers as well. When it does come around to the top 8 announcement, they will be announcing it over the loudspeaker here in the building, but we don't want to spoil any of the matches that we're actually watching. So we'll be muting our microphones during that announcement. So if you hear us go off the air, perhaps abruptly for a second, that's what's going on. Then when we come back, we'll update you on the top 8 players that we know for sure are in who are not on camera. The ones that have been announced already. And then we'll continue watching the rest of the round and see who ends up making it in. We do try to avoid spoilers here. Still don't know what Rolf's up to here. Well, it was a Hazaret too.
What a close game.
So close, Reed.
Now, of course, we can deduce that maybe Tenjum would have made a different attack if he had been at 6 instead of 7. I'm sure he considered the worst case scenario and said, all right, I'm still not dead even if my opponent draws Hazaret, so this looks relatively safe.
Only blocker back for Tenjum is the elemental token, but that thing was born to die one way or the other.
Okay, so John Rolfe is just puzzling out how many blockers do I need in order to survive, and is there any way I can sort of skimp on blockers and hope my opponent makes a mistake, because I need something to go desperately right for me to steal a win here. In other words, if I get in with the Hazaret, is there any way my opponent maybe won't go for the kill, won't see a certain angle that he needs to see?
I got a lot of respect for that approach from John Rolfe as well, even though he knows he's in bad shape and likely going to lose. He is scrapping for any little percentage point that he can get. Andrew Tenjum, though, has perfect information. John Rolfe has no cards in hand. So all he has to do is just add it up and see, okay, well, how does this actually pan out for me? With John Rolfe down to 3 and only 3 blockers left, he can just swing in with everything. Two creatures will get through in this scenario, and any 2 creatures are lethal at this point. So Andrew Tenjum's going to pick up the first game. And there we go. So Grixis Energy, in a matchup that I would assume it's not thrilled to see in mono red, though clearly Andrew's prepared.
Yeah,
right?
Something funny, we actually interviewed Andrew earlier in the day, and he said that one of the reasons he picked Grixis was he was pretty happy with the mono-red matchup.
All right, so then, so the Whirler Virtuosos must just push it over the boundary for him.
That's right. That's the main difference. We've seen a lot of blue-black mid-range over the course of the weekend, but the main difference with this Grixis deck is the presence of that Whirler Virtuoso. Of course, you get to diversify the removal a little bit more, but Whirler Virtuoso, really a card that is able to contend with the very, very best draws of mono red, and that's something that's really special in this format.
Right. And he does have actually, you can see that he's prepared himself for this as well, Reed. He's got 2 Abrades, 2 Fatal Push, 4 Harness Lightning, 2 Magma Spray to go along with the full 4 copies of Vraska's Contempt. So he has skewed a lot of his removal a little bit on the cheaper side with the Abrades and the Magma Sprays and the Harness Lightnings.
Yeah, definitely. So he's very comfortable contending with the early rush of mono red. And the card that I actually want to focus on there is the Vraska's Contempt, which having the full 4, we saw him win that game in part by drawing, was it 3 Vraska's Contempts or 2?
It was 3.
Yeah. Over the course of the weekend, we've been seeing mono red win a lot more games on the back of Hazaret the Fervent, Glorybringer, Rekindling Phoenix, a lot more than on the backs of the 1 and 2 drop creatures. So Andrew Tenjum coming well prepared with the Exile effect, and of course, he won that game at 7 life, effectively 1 life if John Rolfe had made an aggressive attack that last turn, and therefore the 6 life he gained off 3 copies of Vraska's Contempt made the difference.
It was the difference. Yeah, and interesting that you note that, by the way, Reed, because the mono red decks that we've seen on camera for the most part, they're aggressive. They're looking to curve out and get you dead. But they have a pretty strong emphasis on their, I'm going to put it in air quotes, late game, right? Their 4-drop spells. But Rolf's version is actually pretty stripped down. He's got 4 Bomat Courier in the 1-drop slot, which isn't uncommon. He's also got 4 Fanatical Firebrand here. as well. Now, his top end's still pretty good. He's got 4 Hazaret the Fervent and 3 Rekindling Phoenix up top. I don't see any Chandras in the main deck. But you can see with the Bomat Couriers, the On-Crop Crashers, the Fanatical Firebrands, the Carry Zevs, he is looking to, and of course the Earthshaker Kenras, he is looking to very much have an early board presence and then kind of put a little cherry on top with the Rekindling Phoenixes and the Hazaret.
Yeah, and having a lower curve like that, it really plays double duty because there's the obvious reason of you can just have a really fast start and run over your opponent, but also it puts you in absolute prime position to make use of Hazaret the Fervent when you can slam it on turn 4 and be attacking already due to an empty hand. So looking at the 2 players, it seems to me that Andrew Tenjum is a lot more comfortable in his sideboard plan. I'm sure he's played this matchup 4 or 5 times over the course of the weekend. We talked about him being comfortable against mono red, but John Rolfe, considering his options a little more deeply and sort of probably making his last few decisions on the fly.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Andrew looks like he's ready to roll.
He must be feeling great. Up a game, playing his winning in for the top 8, and a matchup that he's had a lot of practice, a lot of experience with.
John Rolfe is more of the contemplative sort. You can see you can see him thinking as he goes through, even though he's just in shuffle mode at this point. But he takes his time. And you really have to with these red decks. There's a misconception that these decks are easier to play. They're generally straightforward in game plan. That part is simpler than a mid-range deck that has to be able to change gears and such. But the decision points are generally fewer for the mono red deck and therefore have more weight. You are punished by mistakes severely, such as missing a few points of damage here or there, or mis-sequencing your spells.
Yeah, I think mono red gets a reputation as being easy because a large portion of its games are lopsided. In other words, like a lot of times your draw is so good and fast with mono red that it's sort of just you win. You don't have to play your cards in any kind of tricky way. You're just going to run over your opponent. However, the games that don't play out like that, the ones that are close where you have to scrap out those last few points of damage, as you mentioned, those are really challenging, and there are certainly turns to be played with this mono red deck that are as difficult or more difficult than any other deck in Standard.
And John is, like I said, he's a careful player. He makes sure that he gets those turns correct, and that's why you see him playing for top 8 here and not in a side draft. All right, game number 2 incoming. Who's going to make it into the top 8? Is it going to be Andrew Tenjum with Grixis Energy? He's 1 game away. John Rolfe on the other side of the battlefield with mono red needs to win back-to-back games. But he gets to be on the play for this one. That's right where he wants to be. And boom, Fanatical Firebrand, the new edition. What do you make of that card, Reed?
I like this card. I mean, I was a big fan of Mog Fanatic. I've played for enough years to know that card is a lot better than it looks. Mog Fanatic, of course, a precursor, a similar templated card to Fanatical Firebrand. But as we said a few times now, this mono red deck, a lot of these games come down to 1 and 2 points of damage here and there. So your 1-drop creature, it doesn't have to hit them for 6 damage. It has to hit them for 3 damage, or it has to hit them for 1 damage and trade with the card. Something like that, and Fanatical Firebrand is very easily able to do that.
Yeah, adds another potent 1-drop to the mix, but the curve for Andrew Tenjum is strong once again. He has Essence Scatter for Pia Nalar on John's turn 3, and on Andrew's turn 3, Whirler Virtuoso, the stop sign. And John's going to have to deal with it. No, he's going to play Rekindling Phoenix and pass the turn back. Still, not bad.
What Whirler Virtuoso does for the dynamic of a game is it basically means, like you said, stop sign. The quick rush of creatures is not going to work. My life total is going to be high going into the mid-game. So now the mono red deck needs to turn to its, well, I don't know if it's plan B or plan A, but turning to the powerful 4 and 5 mana cards to out-muscle the Grixis deck. And it looks like John is doing a fine job transitioning between those two plans, as the Rekindling Phoenix so far is still on the battlefield. And if he can add yet another Chandra, Glorybringer, or Hazoret to the board, he's going to have a fine chance going into the mid-game.
Okay, here's an on-crop Crasher now for John Rolfe. He can use that to take the Whirler Virtuoso out of the equation for this combat step, but not the Thopter. But Andrew looks like he's got a decision to make. You know he has something here. He's not passing with 4 mana up and just saying like, yeah, okay, I'll just take it all, draw a card.
If history is any indicator, he probably has a Vraska's Contempt.
Yeah, that is the thing that you're most concerned about from John's side, and it is not unlikely. I mean, he's running 4 of them in his main deck. I'm assuming that John... Yeah, I might have assumed that. All right, no, I was right. He said, I want to go to combat, and Andrew said, bring it. Do your worst. Now John's giving pause. He's like, wait a second, what?
He's really just deciding, I think, whether or not to exert the Firebrand. To exert the Crasher. Looks like he's not going to. Instead, he declares his attackers. He lightning strikes the Whirler Virtuoso.
And he has that Firebrand back to kill the Thopter.
Now, pretty subtle sequencing here, but the reason that John declared his attack first is he wanted to put pressure on Andrew Tenjum to pull the trigger on a removal spell if he was going to deal with that Crasher before Andrew knew exactly what John's plan was.
And you see, this is really interesting. Tenjum's going to use Harness Lightning to kill the Firebrand. A disaster from Tenjum's perspective in the sense that, well, he gets no energy, but also John still gets to use the Firebrand in response. But this preserves a blocker here for Andrew Tenjum. He does get to soak up 4 damage with that Thopter, and I think that he's valuing that very highly here.
I'm skeptical. I mean, he could have... Okay.
He used a combination of 1 damage from a Thopter plus Magma Spray to exile the Rekindling Phoenix. What do you think about that line?
Looks fine. It, I think, is... There was an alternative line that would just have him bank 2 energy. Bank 1 energy, 2 energy. He could just have done, acted normally, made a token. Presumably John Rolfe would kill it with the Firebrand, and then Tenjum could just deal 1 damage with Harness Lightning to the Rekindling Phoenix, and then Magma Spray it, and the result would be the same, except he'd have 2 energy.
Well,
so, I mean, he got the job done that he needed to get done, but I think maybe he overthought it a little bit.
Okay. Well, John Rolfe immediately adds back to the board with Bomat Courier, but more importantly, Hazoret the Fervent. But Andrew has the answer. Supreme Will counters it. He does still take 4 damage here, though. The pressure's still on Andrew Tenjum, even though he has been answering the big threats, the Rekindling Phoenixes, the Hazorets that often finish the game. Well, On-Crop Crasher and Bomat Courier add up for a lot of damage. Ooh, Vraska's Contempt, and he's going to take out the Bomat Courier. Clearly still trying to play for the longer part of the game, as it's a 2 damage difference.
I'm pretty interested in the way Tenjum has sideboarded here. I want to remind everyone that he's played this matchup several times over the course of the weekend. He claimed that he is very confident, has a great plan against it. And this game 2 here, where he's on the draw, he's packing some of these sort of clunky-ish counter spells in Essence Scatter and Supreme Will that I wouldn't normally have thought of as being great cards against Mono Red. It just shows the respect that he has for those top-end creatures like Rekindling Phoenix, Hazoret, and Glorybringer, identifying those as the key problem cards of the matchup.
By the way, John just pump-faked tapping 4 lands again.
Wow.
Let's see what he's actually got, but the hits keep coming from John Rolfe. He is not going to go quietly here if he's going to go.
So he, of course, is going to be considering Torrential Gearhulk. That's the hallmark of a blue player passing with 6 mana. And normally I might say, you know what? I'm probably just not going to win if he has Torrential Gearhulk for Vraska's Contempt. But he does have that Scavenger Grounds to maybe give himself a chance. Jeez.
Wow. Huge swing for Andrew Tenjum. He does have the Hulk. He can let Hazaret resolve because he has an answer, and he gets to block too, so he gets to just eat an on-crop crasher for free, and a massive swing back in the other direction. Andrew's going to start hitting with this Torrential Gearhulk, and it is going to be John Rolfe's life total that's falling like rain. And look at this, a Whirler Virtuoso as well for a little bit of a backup plan from Andrew Tenjum, who's at 10 life. And I think he is going to be able to finish things off here as Kari Zev, not a good blocker, against the Torrential Gearhulk. And I think we're seeing the last few turns of this game, Reed. That was a massive swing. Things were kind of close-ish. You know, Rolfe, it felt like it was slipping away. And then, boom, Andrew Tenjum pulled the rug out from under him, and I don't think he's going to be able to recover.
Yeah, Torrential Gearhulk, flashing back what is Andrew's almost his best card in the matchup, Vraska's Contempt, getting a free block on the on-crop crasher.
And that is going to do it. Andrew Tenjum wins the match 2-0, and that's going to put him into the top 8. Congratulations, Andrew. A great run with Grixis Energy, and we're going to get to see more of it as he makes his way into the top 8. The players are going to commiserate a little here. John Rolfe is going to have to settle for one of those close calls, but a really good finish here with Mono Red. He continues his streak of super strong finishes at the professional level.
Yeah, I mean, that performance, just absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. When you're going 12-3 against a tough field, that's exactly where you want to be. It just means when you run a little above expectation, you're in the top 8. When you run average, you're still having a great finish, well in the money, potentially as high as the top 16 for John Rolfe.
That's right, and he'll pick up some much-needed pro points. As you mentioned, he's on his way to platinum, or he's trying to run it up with a strong performance early in the season. You can build off of that, and he gets to book, GP wins GP finishes as pro points towards that. So potentially pretty important one for John Rolfe. Good job. But Andrew Tenjum's the one who's into the top 8. We're going to take a short commercial break. When we come back, though, we'll be wrapping up the red zone here with our last matches from round number 15. We'll see you in just a little bit. back to the booth here at GP Memphis. That's Ray Duke. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe. Thanks so much for coming along. For Standard, we are in round number 15. We're at the end of MTG Red Zone. That means that they're dropping like flies and people are making their way into the top 8. We've got some time walk magic for you here. Now, we're going to come in we're going to come into game number 2 between Heath Vance and John Farrow. So why don't we head down for that right now? All right, so on the left-hand side of your screen is Heath Vance on 12 and 2. On the other side is John Farrow on 12 and 2. They're probably playing for top 8, though not guaranteed. Though it looks like the winner will be in the top 8. Blue-black control playing against the one blue-white cycling deck that made it into day 2 here in Memphis.
Wow, I wonder if it's a coincidence that the one deck that made it today, the one copy that made it to day 2 is crushing it here, playing for top 8.
Maybe more people should have played it, huh?
Maybe. Or maybe John Farrow knows something that the other blue-white cycling player just don't.
That could be as well. But all he knows right now is that his search for his content just got negated by Heath Vance. He certainly doesn't want to let him see that. And we see hieroglyphic illumination from Heath. John also has one of those in his hand.
So this is a pretty interesting matchup, a control mirror between blue-black control and white-blue cycling. The blue-black control deck, I would say, a little bit more of a pure control deck, more counter spells, more card drawing, and that's its advantage in the matchup. However, white-blue cycling has a lot of non-creature permanents that can really give a control opponent fits. Drakehaven, of course, sort of the hallmark card of the deck, is one great example. And the fact that blue-black control, the blue-black color combination in general, has such a hard time removing those non-creature threats is John Farrow's advantage in this matchup.
John has started discarding cards here, Reed. Looks like finding his land drops has really eluded him, even though he's been cycling and drawing cards. He's discarded Settle the Wreckage, he figures. That was not high on his priority list, but he's missing a land drop again? Is that possible? Yeah. Goodness sakes. Well, no, it looks like he may cycle a hieroglyphic illumination. He missed again.
Wow, yeah, missing land drops traditionally, if not the kiss of death in a control mirror, definitely something that's going to put you at a disadvantage.
Now, he gets kind of bailed out here. John says, I'd like to go to cleanup.
Yeah.
And Heath goes, you know what? I'm going to cast a Torrential Gear Hulk. And John says, sweet, I get to use one of my counters, and I don't have to discard it.
While that might not have been a bad play at face value, I do kind of like when your opponent's missing land drops in a control mirror, just taking advantage of the discarding to hand size advantage, because these games do go super long and every single resource winds up mattering. Especially you're against a cycling deck, every resource is sort of interchangeable because so many of the cards have cycling. So I would have just been a little more patient and let John Farrow discard to hand size instead of letting him pick a good spot to use a counterspell there on the Torrential Gear Hulk.
I think I sort of expected Heath to untap and play something big on his turn while John was untapped.
Yep. You bring up a great point, Marshall. That's a play pattern you really want to go for in these control mirrors, where you can play a potent threat at the end of the turn and on your own turn in order to sort of overload the opponent's counterspells and their mana. The last thing you want to do is just play one card per turn, because that's what plays into an opponent with a handful of permission.
And you can see it's land go for most of these turns. I know it gets a little bit confusing when you're watching, but that's what's happening is these players are playing these spells on their opponent's end steps pretty consistently. And John has managed to find his land drops, but he continues to discard to hand size here, Reed. Pretty awkward for him.
Yeah, although...
Ooh, duress off the top for Heath.
Okay, that's another advantage that the black-based control deck has in this matchup. Duress, not only is it a very cheap way to trade off resources and nab one of your opponent's better cards, also, you're going to see how powerful getting to take a look at the opponent's hand is in a complicated game like this, giving Heath Vance a big information advantage and ability to plan around what John Farrow's packing, whereas John Farrow is mostly in the dark.
I don't know how he's going to do it, though. It's triple countervailing winds, negate, disallow, cast out planes.
Yep, definitely.
That's a lot of counter magic.
Definitely a daunting hand to be facing down. This is why Heath Vance needs to employ those techniques that we were just discussing a minute ago, letting the opponent miss land drops, discard to hand size, overloading mana by doing an end-of-turn threat and untapping and playing a threat. He really can't just play his cards in the most obvious way because that's going to play into the powerful hand of John Farrow.
Heath has had no problem hitting his land drops. He plays one, passes a turn. John passes a turn back after playing an Ipnu Rivulet, which could be a factor later on down the road. And now Heath is the one who's discarding the hand size. He's going to discard an Essence Scatter.
Wow, look at John Farrow not playing his irrigated farmland there.
Interesting. He'd prefer to just have a... You usually just value land drops so heavily, even over more cards.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you get to the point in the game where there's been a flurry of action, you both spend a lot of your resources, then the dust settles, and you do want to cycle to more action. But this still seems like the early or middle parts of the game to me, where I want to be focusing on keeping my hand size below 8, making my land drops, setting up to have a mana advantage into the late game.
I like how you think, Reed. It's like turn 13. Got that early game on lockdown.
Players visibly playing their lands off the top of the library. This time John Farrow decides not to hold his cycling land.
Land. That's okay. So I'm sitting at home. I got a big bowl of popcorn. I got an Arnold Palmer in front of me, and I'm watching this on the screen. How does this end? We saw 4 effectively hard counters in hand for John Farrow. Heath Vance has nothing going on his side of the battlefield. What does the end game look like for these players?
Okay, well, in order to answer that question, we
also,
need
do you want some
to
popcorn? I share.
we need to first consider how does the game play out if neither player ever does anything. And the card I want to point to you is the Ipnu Rivulet on John Farrow's side of the battlefield.
Right.
It may not come to this, but hypothetically, if this holding pattern continues forever, John Farrow will just sacrifice a few deserts over the course of a few turns to mill Heath Vance for 12 or 16 cards, and he'll deck him. That could come up in the control mirror. Now, because of that, it's on Heath Vance to make sure he does something and wins the game before it gets to that point. So in this sort of stare down, it's like a samurai duel or something where the players are facing each other down, waiting for the opponent to make the first move. And the player who has to make the first move has a big disadvantage because they have to play into the hands of their opponent's open mana and their counter spells. So Heath Vance has a challenge in front of him. He's gonna have to resolve something that can win the game, or else John Farrow will just inevitably win by doing nothing.
Now, Heath Vance does have access to Field of Ruin. He actually just used one, but he's got, it looks like, another couple on the battlefield. He could try to head off that path to victory by taking out the Ipnu Rivulet.
Yeah, it is interesting to me that John Farrow would tap the Rivulet because that does leave it exposed to Field of Ruin.
Yes. I would be very nervous about that.
Perhaps the players aren't necessarily thinking along the same lines as I am. Maybe they have a more immediate plan.
So you're saying that they're just incorrect?
Or I'm incorrect.
No, come on. We know that's not on the table here.
Undeniably. Wow.
Oh, man. Discarding a torrential Gearhook to hand size?
Okay, now I know that John Farrow is thinking along the same lines as I am, because if he's discarding one of his best win conditions there, he must think, I don't care about attacking his life total. I'm going to win a different way.
Holy smokes. And the duress is going to earn a negate. Though I'll say, I agree with you before there, Reed, that if John is thinking about using that Rivulet to try to end this game, he's not going to want to expose it. Even one activation can be the difference. Here's Search for Azcanta. Could help John find more of the same.
Yeah, so Azcanta's probably going to transform, get one activation, and then eat a Field of Ruin.
Okay.
But that is probably just fine for John Farrow.
He's not going to transform it. He doesn't want it to. He doesn't want to expose it to Field of Ruin, it looks like.
So John looks to be digging to something.
Yes.
I'm a little concerned because due to the nature of the cycling deck, he goes through his library at a much higher velocity than the blue-black control deck. So if he is going to win with Ipni Rivulet, he has to make sure that he stays, at least within 3 or 4 cards or 7 or 8 cards of his opponent in terms of library size.
He ended up keeping a sensor last turn after putting one in the bin the turn prior, and now he's going to transform. Oh, here we go. The big finish. It's a Drakehaven.
So it looks like John Farrow who's going to make the first move here.
So he wants to resolve this Drakehaven through any counter magic that Heath Vance has, and then try to make a bunch of Drakes all in one big shot.
Yeah, or the fact that Drakehaven is such a cheap threat is a big advantage because he could hypothetically sneak it into play, win his counterspell battle here, then just sort of sit on it. And if Heath Vance then has to make a move with something big and clunky like a Commit Memory or a Consign Oblivion, then John can react accordingly either by fighting counterspell battle again, letting it resolve and recasting the Drakehaven, or making a few Drakes in response.
And here comes the fight. Negate your Drakehaven. How about countervailing winds? Commit I assume the Drakehaven. But John says, I'm a patient man.
Jeez, and can you imagine if this game gets reset by a memory?
Oh, my. Reed will never leave. We'll be here all day. Field of Ruin, and John, with a little flourish, says, I'll take this Drakehaven, thank you.
Yep.
He hit that off of the Ascanta the Sunken Ruin.
And of course, he knew it was there based on Commit Memory.
Looks like he's out of basics.
Okay.
Or if he is, he doesn't want another one. Oh, no, maybe he's changing his mind.
So another thing to mention is some of John Farrow's earlier plays can be explained by wanting to make sure he has a big graveyard for the purposes of countervailing winds.
Yeah.
Like that, even though it seemed a little inconsistent to put one sensor in the graveyard and one in his hand with the Ascanta activations, it could just be managing the size of his graveyard a little bit. Looks like players are finally getting to that stage where they're counting libraries.
Yeah, I tried to get a count on John's library while he was kind of going through it, and I thought I counted about 16 or so cards, but black sleeves on a black background, it made it a little bit difficult to tell. But, I would guess somewhere in the little below 20 range there for John.
Wow. I'm impressed that you would even try to accomplish that, Marshall.
Yeah, I'm all over it, buddy.
A keen eye.
Wow, I was right. I think I was right, yeah. Anyway, he's got not that many cards to go, though plenty enough to get the job done here if he can get this Drakehaven rolling, because that thing can spit out a bunch of Drakes, and those can end the game pretty quickly. But he does have to get it resolved, and here's Disallow for Heath. Oh, no, the chat, you are crazy. They want him to cast Memory. They're begging for it in the chat. He's going to cast Commit.
It's a second copy of Commit.
That's right. Not to be confused with Memory. And once again, there's a big fight over this Drakehaven, though I am curious if Heath wins this fight, he still has to find a way to win the game. Right? Like, he's not, like, just stopping John from getting...
Now,
this is interesting.
Tell me again, how close do you have a handle on the size of each player's library?
Yeah, so I'm assuming that Heath's library is between 5 and 10 cards larger than John's because he hasn't been just cycling away like a madman. And I think John is somewhere in the just below 20 range. Call it 15.
Okay. So that means it would take more than one activation of Ipnu Rivulet for John Farrow to catch up.
Probably 2.
One Ipnu Rivulet already in the graveyard due to Field of Ruin. So, wow.
By the way, here's the win condition.
Here's a win condition. Yeah, Nezahal, Primal Tide. Very resilient win condition, uncounterable.
Effectively unkillable as long as Heath can keep a healthy hand size going. Cast out, and Heath says, trigger. By the way, Nezahal is a must.
Oh, my goodness. That could definitely come up here.
Yeah.
At 26 life, I wonder if John Farrow can just cast enough spells to make Nezahal deck its controller.
Pretty funny. I knew those drafts I was doing were helping me for my standard prep when I put myself in a situation where I was on the bad side of that. My opponent could deck me by casting 3 non-creature spells.
Let's be honest, Marshall. Even if it was a May ability, I don't think you would have it in you to resist.
I don't either. And for the record, I did lose as a result. But I went out on my own terms, Reed.
Yep.
Doing what I love.
That's what counts. Okay, a huge card for John Farrow here.
What has he found?
He's shuffled to the top of his library, Abandoned Sarcophagus, and that would allow him to definitely do the technique that we just described of casting enough spells that Nezahal Primal Tide would just deck Heath Vance.
He is not... Is he seriously going to try to deck Heath's own Nezahal?
I mean, look at his graveyard, Marshall. He's got 3 Renewed Faiths in the graveyard. Each one of those represents a trigger from Nezahal and one more turn that Nezahal has to attack before it can kill John Farrow. Now, this whole equation, I'm going to get a headache from this, but this whole equation is complicated by the 2 commit memories in Heath Vance's graveyard.
I can't take it.
So I don't know how this game's going to end, but it's going to be weird.
Also, we have Drakehaven online now for John Farrow. And he's going to start just churning through. It looks like he's going to try to stick with the Drake plan here, Reed.
Yeah, and it might work. He can make a lot of Drakes this turn. They can fly over Nezahal, and it seems like he's in a position to outrace the Elder Dinosaur.
Yeah. Yeah, he can basically make a Drake chump block when needed, and like you said, just fly over the top with all the other ones. And these Drakes get out of hand extremely quickly. Heath Vance is not going to be able to answer them on a one-for-one basis.
All right, so let's forget about decking for a moment and focus on how Heath Vance is going to manage the Drakehaven and actually win the game with damage. So that seems to be the direction that both players want to take this game.
Feels unlikely that he's able to do so.
Yeah, he's already used both commit memories, so
there's an Essence Scatter.
He can't get the Drakehaven off the battlefield. It also seems unlikely that he can fight through fair and square with removal spells.
I think we're on the memory plan in that case, though he still loses, right?
He would still lose. I mean, John Farrow has so many lands in play and such a large proportion of his deck cycles.
Scarab God. John has 9 cards left in his library right now.
Okay, well, the Scarab God, the great thing about this is it can rebuy Torrential Gearhulks.
Whoa, he's got to trigger Nezahal.
Yeah, he does.
Oh, no, he didn't do it.
Now, it's
awkward.
It's awkward.
Oh, he's seeing if it's a May?
But the judges will be able to handle this. This is just a classic case of a missed trigger. So I think under most circumstances, Nezahal will be considered a beneficial trigger, which means if you miss it, just sorry, you missed it. But if hypothetically, if Heath Vance had only 2 cards left in his library and the judges investigated and determined that he had done it on purpose, not drawn his card, that would be a violation, but it does not seem like that's the case, at least from where I'm sitting.
Well, what I want to know is does he have to draw the card still?
Well, they're going to ask John Farrow, would you like to put this trigger on the stack for your opponent?
Okay. And it looks like he may have declined, so he's not on the mill plan if that's the case. Really high pressure situation here for these gentlemen. They're sitting at 12-2, playing for a potential seat in the top 8 with a loser
and
has no chance.
This has very wide-reaching consequences if these players go to Game 3 short on time.
Absolutely.
Because this, of course, has been a marathon game. And if these players risk an unintentional draw, it's unclear if either or both of them will be in the top 8, and if maybe a different player with a record of 12-2-1 can sneak in. So it could be very consequential match for a player like Jonathan Pennick, who was currently in 15th place going into this match.
Hey, Reed, I'm gonna interrupt you for a second because they're about to do the top 8 announcement, so we're going to go off of commentary for a second. Just watch the game as it goes. We'll be right back once it's on. All right, we are back. The top 8 announcement took an extra minute there. Reed, have you been keeping up on this thing? We've been handed a big pile of papers, but this thing's gotten really intense with that Rivers rebuke.
Man, we've seen some fireworks here. So the Rivers rebuke actually was a perfect answer for Heath Vance to get rid of the Drake Haven. Now he's one attack away with Neza Hall from winning the game. Both players' libraries dwindling. And, wow, what's going to happen here?
With double Drake Haven and a decent amount of mana, there's not much that Heath can do to keep John Farrow from making Drakes here.
No, but John Farrow is in a chump block obligated situation due to his life total. And look, he's only got about 4 cards left in his library. That means maximum of about 3 cycles.
So he can get 2 Drakes per cycle, though. Trigger, trigger. Pay, pay. Pay. You have to draw the card. This is the annoying part from John. I don't know how John wins from this position, right? Like, he can perhaps survive.
Yeah, remember the commit memories are in Heath's graveyard, so he's the one controlling those.
John wouldn't mind borrowing one of those. Land off the top of the library. He's going to peck in for 2 damage. With 2 cards left in his library, he can only cycle 1 more time. Let's see how he gets the job done. He's got to block at least once, but he still needs to be able to attack for 8.
Okay, cycle Desert of the True.
Uh-huh. Make a bunch of Drakes, but one of them's got to die here. Sure. Now, Ipnu Rivulet's long gone, right?
Yeah, there's no Ipnu Rivulet.
How is John getting out of this? Yeah, he has to chump, and it only leaves him with 4 power, 1 card left in his library. Is the last one an Ipnu Rivulet?
It is!
Oh, my God.
So how many cards in Heath Vance's library? John Farrow, if it's 6 cards or fewer, John Farrow can win the game because, well, potentially win the game. His hand is Ipnu Rivulet, that's 4.
Okay.
He has Ixalan's Binding, that's going to force a draw from Nezahal. And he has Negate, so if Heath Vance decides to pick a fight over the Ixalan's Binding, that's another card that he'll be forced to draw.
Or he can negate his own Ixalan's Binding.
That's true. That's a great play as well.
No, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't even play it out. Heath must have had plenty of cards left in his library, though it didn't look like it from here. And Heath Vance advances, winning his round and putting himself in a good position to make it into the top 8. Now, I have the final standing sitting in front of me, but are we going to be showing any more? Taking a look at the clock, I can announce this. Okay, yeah, Rashad says it's okay to announce it. Reed, you want to do the honors here?
Oh, I'd love to.
We've also got a graphic. Why don't you put it up, Rashad, and we'll go through it with the viewers together. But we do have our top 8 here. And in first place?
First place, we have Blake Miller. So he was our first place going into the second to last round, and he intentionally drew into the top 8. Second place, Andrew Tendrum with Grixis mid-range. We watched him win against John Rolfe. Third place, Tyler Schrodender. He won at table 4 rather, against Ari Lax. Fourth place, Heath Vance, Blue-Black Control. We just watched him beat Blue-White Cycling in his win-and-in match. Fifth place, Aaron Barich with that very innovative Hadana's Climb Sultai deck. Sixth place, Eric Froelich, Hall of Fame player, Blue-Black Control. Seventh place, Matthew Kling. He was our last undefeated, also playing Grixis, so that's a second copy of same deck as Andrew Tenjum. And then eighth place, Michael Cochran. Unfortunately, Jonathan Pennick, he was our lowest tiebreakers X2-1 player. He did not make the top 8, even though he did win to have a great 12-2-1 record.
Yeah, check out the big names in the top 16. You see John Rolfe down there.